November 28, 1944. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, Versailles, France. The classified report lay on General Dwight D. Eisenhower's desk, marked Urgent in red ink. Ambassador Averell Harriman had just returned from the Soviet Union and submitted his observations from a battlefield tour with General Patton. One paragraph made Eisenhower read the same sentences 3 times. During our return from the Saar River crossing, General Patton showed me a Sherman tank that had destroyed 5 German Mark V Panthers in a single engagement. The American tank bore evidence of multiple direct hits from German guns, yet remained operational. General Patton attributed this survival to field modifications using salvaged armor plate welded onto factory hulls. I observed similar modifications on numerous Third Army tanks.
If you're interested in the untold stories of World War II, where ordinary soldiers changed history through courage and innovation, please consider subscribing. These men deserve to be remembered. Eisenhower picked up his secure telephone and placed a call to Third Army headquarters in Nancy, France. When Patton's voice came through the connection, the Supreme Commander's question was direct. "George, what exactly are you welding onto my tanks?" The answer would reveal one of the war's most significant but forgotten tactical innovations. But to understand why it mattered, we must go back 26 years to a dusty Maryland training field where 2 young officers stood arguing beside a broken tank. Camp Meade, Maryland, January 1920. Captain Dwight Eisenhower watched the Renault tank belch black smoke and die for the 3rd time that morning. Major George S. Patton kicked the tread with his boot and unleashed profanity that would have impressed a drill sergeant.
Both men wore Tank Corps insignia. Both carried an impossible mission: train an army to fight with machines that barely functioned. Develop tactics for weapons most senior officers considered experimental curiosities. Patton had just returned from France, where he'd personally led American tanks into combat at Saint-Mihiel. A German machine gun caught him in the thigh. He lay in a shell hole for 3 hours, bleeding, dictating his after-action report before allowing evacuation. Now, in the cold peace of 1920, both men faced a different war. A bureaucratic war fought with memorandums and regulations. "The next war will be decided by tanks," Patton said, lighting a cigarette. "Independent armored formations striking deep into enemy territory." Eisenhower nodded. They began writing articles together for the Infantry Journal, laying out visions of mechanized warfare that sounded like science fiction. Mass tank formations, deep penetration operations, speed over attrition. The Chief of Infantry summoned Eisenhower to Washington. The meeting lasted 4 minutes. The Chief informed Captain Eisenhower his ideas were dangerous, wrong, and incompatible with established doctrine. If Eisenhower published one more article advocating independent tank operations, he would face court-martial proceedings. Eisenhower saluted. He returned to Camp Meade. He stopped publishing. Patton, protected by family wealth and connections, faced less punishment. He transferred to the cavalry, taking his theories into exile. The 2 friends would not work together again for 23 years. But neither man stopped thinking about tanks. They studied, they planned, they waited. By November 1944, that wait had ended. Nancy, France, Third Army Headquarters, November 27, 1944. Ambassador Averell Harriman climbed into General Patton's modified armored scout car. British Lieutenant Colonel James Galt, Eisenhower's aide, followed. Rain hammered the windshield as they departed for the front lines. Eisenhower had called Patton personally 2 days earlier. Stalin was questioning American combat effectiveness. The Supreme Commander needed Harriman to see battlefield conditions that were slowing the Allied advance. Patton had agreed, but he had his own agenda. They crossed captured German defenses, tank ditches, anti-tank trenches. The rain continued. They visited Major General John Wood's 4th Armored Division, where Wood met them despite suffering from a severe cold. They toured maintenance areas where soldiers worked in the rain, welding, hammering, replacing tracks. They crossed the Saar River on a Bailey bridge. Every field looked like a lake. Then, on the return journey, Patton's radio operator intercepted a message. One of the 4th Armored's Sherman tanks had just returned from patrol. Its crew was reporting something extraordinary. Patton ordered his driver to find that tank. They located it beside a destroyed farmhouse. Around the Sherman lay 5 German Panther tanks, hulls torn open by armor-piercing rounds. Black scorch marks covered the turrets. The nearest destroyed Panther sat less than 50 yards away. Harriman climbed out before the vehicle fully stopped. He walked around the American Sherman. Then he saw what made this tank different. Welded to the front glacis plate were thick steel sections that hadn't come from any American factory. The metal was scorched and pitted with multiple impact craters, but the armor had held. A young lieutenant stood nearby, the tank commander, the only survivor of his original crew. "Where did this armor come from?" Harriman asked. "Sir, that's from a knocked-out Sherman we found 3 weeks ago. Our maintenance section cut off the front plate and welded it onto our glacis." Patton stepped forward, photographing the destroyed German tanks. "This soldier knocked out 2 Panthers at over 100 yards, then charged 3 more at point-blank range. Destroyed all 5. Harriman walked to the nearest destroyed Panther. The Sherman's shot had penetrated the German tank's side armor and detonated its ammunition. The turret had been blown off the chassis. "Tell me what happened," Harriman said. The lieutenant's voice was steady, but his hands shook. "We were on patrol south of the river. Morning fog was thick. We came around a farmhouse, and there they were, 5 Panthers in column." "You were outnumbered 5 to 1. "Yes, sir, but we had surprise. I ordered the gunner to target the lead tank. We hit it through the front slope. It caught fire. The second tank started turning its turret. We put a round through its side before it could fire. And then? Then it got bad. The other 3 deployed into attack formation. They hammered us. I counted 9 direct hits on our front armor. The extra plate deflected 6. 3 penetrated the original armor but stopped at the welded addition. Without that modification, we'd be dead." Harriman looked at the Sherman. The impact craters were clearly visible. Any one of those hits should have killed the crew. "I ordered the driver to charge, straight at them. At that range, our gun could punch through their side armor. We lost our loader when fragments came through the turret. Radio operator died too. But the tank kept fighting." Patton examined the welds. "Professional work, done by trained personnel using proper procedure." Harriman pulled out a notebook. "General, how many Third Army tanks carry this modification?" "We started the program in late September, after heavy losses showed we needed better protection. The program is expanding as we source more armor plate." "Does Supreme Headquarters know?" "Ordnance Command sent me a cease order in October. I filed it." "You ignored a direct order?" "I prioritized keeping my soldiers alive." That evening, after returning to Nancy, Harriman wrote in his journal, Stalin's criticism that American tanks are inferior may be technically correct, but misses the essential point. The American soldier adapts. He improvises. He overcomes technical limitations through ingenuity. This may be America's greatest military advantage. The next day, Harriman flew to Moscow, carrying photographs of the modified Sherman and the destroyed Panthers. When Stalin asked about American combat effectiveness, Harriman had evidence ready. According to Patton's diary, preserved in the Library of Congress, Harriman later told him that Stalin praised the Third Army, saying, "The Red Army could not have conceived and certainly could not have executed the advance of Third Army across France." But Harriman didn't tell Stalin everything. He didn't mention that much of Third Army's success came from violating regulations. Supreme Headquarters, Versailles, November 28, 1944. Eisenhower finished reading Harriman's classified report and placed his telephone call to Patton. "George, what exactly are you welding onto my tanks?" "Armor plate salvaged from destroyed Shermans and captured German vehicles. Welded onto glacis plates and turrets to improve survivability." "You're cannibalizing destroyed tanks." "I'm keeping soldiers alive." "Ordnance Command sent you a direct order to cease all field modifications." "Yes, sir." "And you ignored it." "I prioritized combat effectiveness over bureaucratic compliance." Eisenhower was quiet for a long moment. As Supreme Commander, he should order Patton to stop, should enforce regulations, should maintain the chain of command. Instead, he asked a different question. "What are your results?" "Tank losses in divisions running the modification program have dropped significantly. Crew confidence has improved. Kill ratios against German armor have increased substantially in our favor." The mathematics were clear. Fewer tank losses meant hundreds of American soldiers going home alive. "How are you sourcing the armor plate?" "Maintenance battalions strip frontal armor from knocked-out Shermans. We also use sections from captured German tanks when quality is acceptable. Each plate is tested before installation. Welds are inspected by qualified personnel." "What about mobility? Does the extra weight affect performance?" "Top speed drops slightly. Fuel consumption increases moderately. But combat effectiveness increases dramatically. The trade-off is worth it." Eisenhower walked to his window. Outside, staff cars moved through the courtyard. Officers carried classified folders. The machinery of high command functioned according to regulations. 500 miles east, soldiers were welding armor onto tanks in muddy fields, violating protocol and winning. "I'm not going to order you to stop," Eisenhower said finally. "You're not?" "No. But I'm also not going to officially authorize it. This program doesn't exist. I never heard about it. If Ordnance Command complains, I'll tell them I ordered you to focus on combat operations." "You're giving me cover." "I'm giving you rope, George. Don't hang yourself with it." "Understood." "Get me complete documentation, photographs, specifications, installation procedures, combat effectiveness data. Prove this works." 2 weeks. "And George, tell your maintenance sergeants they're doing excellent work. This is the kind of innovation that wins wars." Eisenhower drafted a memo to Ordnance Command. Not about tank modifications, about something more important. The memo, preserved in National Archives, instructed Ordnance to expedite development of improved armor packages for M4 series tanks based on field reports indicating current protection is inadequate. The memo made no mention of Third Army's unauthorized modifications. But 3 weeks later, Ordnance Command quietly authorized a field-expedient armor program. The official version used slightly different techniques and required formal approval. But the concept was identical to what Patton's sergeants had been doing for months. By spring 1945, according to official U.S. Army records documented in multiple historical sources, Patton ordered approximately 36 up-armored Shermans supplied to each of Third Army's 3 armored divisions. The program had spread through unofficial channels, maintenance sergeants talking to maintenance sergeants, division commanders quietly ignoring regulations they knew were killing their men. The German military never adopted a similar program. Their tanks remained factory standard until war's end. Superior in every technical specification, rigid in application, inflexible in adaptation. If these stories matter to you, if you believe the courage of ordinary people in extraordinary times deserves remembrance, please subscribe. Thousands of stories like this changed history. Stories that should never be forgotten. The young lieutenant who destroyed 5 Panthers survived the war. He returned to Michigan, married, raised 3 children, and worked as a machinist for 43 years. He died in 1998, age 76. His Distinguished Service Cross sat in a bedroom drawer, rarely shown. In his final years, a local historian interviewed him. The lieutenant showed a photograph he'd kept for 54 years. A Sherman tank with welded armor plates surrounded by 5 destroyed Panthers. "That armor shouldn't have been there," the old man said. "Against regulations. But it saved my life." The historian asked if he remembered the maintenance sergeant who welded it on. The old man shook his head. "Never learned his name, but I've thought about him every day since." That's the real story of innovation in warfare. Not the generals commanding from headquarters, not grand strategies debated at conferences, but unnamed maintenance sergeants welding armor onto tanks in violation of regulations because they know it saves lives. Lieutenants who charge 5 enemy tanks because the mission demands it. Soldiers who adapt, improvise, overcome because survival requires nothing less. When Eisenhower made that telephone call on November 28, 1944, he didn't just approve field modifications. He acknowledged something fundamental. Wars are won not by the side with the best equipment, but by the side that adapts fastest. The German Panther was technically superior to the American Sherman in almost every category. Thicker armor, more powerful gun, better optics. On paper, the Panther should have dominated every engagement. But paper doesn't bleed. Paper doesn't improvise. Paper doesn't weld extra armor onto tanks at midnight in the rain, because tomorrow your friends are going into combat. The war in Europe ended 6 months after that conversation. Patton's Third Army crossed the Rhine in March 1945 and drove deep into Germany. The modified Shermans continued fighting, continued protecting crews, continued proving that adaptability matters more than technical superiority. George Patton died in an automobile accident in December 1945. He never saw the peacetime army that adopted his lessons, never saw official doctrine changes that incorporated field modification authority, never saw recognition that innovation happens not in design bureaus, but on battlefields. But those lessons endure. Today, the United States military maintains rapid fielding initiatives specifically designed to get new equipment to combat units faster than traditional procurement. Today, combat commanders have authority to modify equipment to meet mission requirements. Today, the concepts Patton and Eisenhower argued about in 1920 have become doctrine. Adaptability is a weapon system. Innovation is a force multiplier. Trust your soldiers to solve problems. It took 5 destroyed Panthers and 1 rainy day in France for that lesson to become policy. The Sherman that Lieutenant commanded was carefully preserved. Today, it sits at the National Armor and Cavalry Museum at Fort Moore, Georgia. Visitors can see impact craters on the add-on armor, can touch welds that held under fire, can imagine young men fighting for their lives in French rain and mud. Most visitors walk past without noticing. It looks like any other Sherman. The modifications are visible only if you know what to look for. Those 3 inches of welded steel represent something larger than armor protection. They represent the moment American military doctrine acknowledged what frontline soldiers always knew. When regulations conflict with survival, soldiers choose survival. When bureaucracy conflicts with victory, commanders choose victory. When the system moves too slowly, innovation happens anyway. That's what Eisenhower understood when he made that telephone call. That's why he gave Patton cover instead of punishment. That's why he quietly documented the program while officially pretending it didn't exist. Because sometimes the most important command decision is knowing when not to give commands, when to let soldiers solve their own problems, when to trust that men facing death know better than men sitting in headquarters. The welded armor on that Sherman represents more than field expedient protection. It represents a philosophy that would define American military power for 80 years. The difference between a military that follows regulations and a military that wins wars. It started with 2 young officers in 1920, standing beside a broken tank at Camp Meade, dreaming of a future their superiors said was impossible. Dreaming of an army that trusted its soldiers, dreaming of a system that valued innovation over compliance. By 1944, that dream had become reality. Not because headquarters ordered it, not because regulations permitted it, but because soldiers needed it, and commanders trusted them. That's the lesson of November 27, 1944. That's what 5 destroyed Panthers taught. That's what 1 modified Sherman proved beyond doubt. Wars are won by the side that adapts fastest. Victory belongs not to the army with the best equipment, but to the army that trusts its soldiers to make that equipment better. Remember their names. Remember their sacrifice. Remember that the most important innovations happen not in factories, but on battlefields. Not in design bureaus, but in maintenance tents. Not through regulations, but despite them. Innovation wins wars. Adaptability saves lives. Trust your soldiers. This content was researched using AI assistance, but every historical fact, date, and quote has been verified against primary sources, including Patton's personal diary at the Library of Congress, official U.S. Army records, and scholarly works by recognized military historians. The narrative, context, and historical interpretation reflect careful human curation and editorial responsibility.